We'd spent 10 years traveling the world snowboarding. We could write a guidebook. Well, I'm not going to be like Marcus Aurelius. The Stoics, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. Okay. The principle is still the same. Like, you have to work out like how to earn money in an unconventional way. Yeah, well, I mean, we got fired, so. Well, people that write for snowboard mags now are still getting paid what we got paid back then, which I think it's like the Big Mac price metric, isn't it? I remember having a conversation with Chris where we were like, we might have to get a proper job here. This is getting really serious. That really forced us to.
In this Sports and Outdoor Mentors episode, I chat with Matt Barr, the co-owner and co-founder of All Conditions Media. Matt is a writer, journalist, author, editor, podcaster, publisher, and business owner who has worked in the action sports media and communications since the mid-1990s. We talk about the early days of starting their own business, transitioning to an employee-owned business, and much, much more. If you're an action sports fan, I highly recommend you check out his fantastic podcast, Looking Sideways, where Matt discusses all things action sports with some iconic guests. Before we get into this episode, I do have one favour to ask. Less than 50% of people watching or listening are subscribed. So please hit the subscribe or follow button to help us reach more people so that they can also benefit from the valuable insights leaders like Matt share. I hope you enjoy the episode. If you do, please don't forget to like and leave a comment. So, Matt, 20 years, almost 20 years experience working in the industry. So initially as editor.
Probably longer, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, probably more like getting on for 30.
Okay.
Yeah, showing my age.
So what was why the action sports industry? What was the pull of that first?
Well, I mean, I was into it really from a young age. I grew up from a pretty young age, skateboarding, snowboarding, later surfing. I got into surfing later. My route in was just because I was into it. I didn't really have like this grand plan of like, I'm going to get a career in that world. Early on, I was skateboarding, met a load of friends through skateboarding who became like still some of my closest friends now, who were really influential in what I ended up doing. And then a couple of those were doing seasons, a few years older than me. So I sort of, they were like, why don't you come do season? So I did a season, and then through that, got my first job in the industry. So it was all pretty serendipitous. It was all, me and one of the lads I'm talking about, Chris, who's been a really influential figure in my career and life, really. For years, we were always a bit like, we just don't want to get a proper job as the joke, really. And that's kind of still the deal, really. I've always been more driven by trying to do interesting things. And obviously, one of the things that these activities give you is the opportunity to see a different side of the world, which I was lucky enough that then filtered into my working life as well, and has ended up becoming a career, strangely enough.
And were you, if you think back to your days in education, were you always very creative then? Was it something that was already kind of that shined through at an early age, that creativity?
I was lucky that, we're talking was at school in the late 80s, early 90s. So I was lucky that it's quite a common story, isn't it? I had a teacher, who was very influential, who sort of, when I was about 14, sort of said to me, like, you're a really good writer. You should really think about doing that as a career. So at the time, that was about the age that I thought that I was like, journalism, that's what I'd like to do. So from that age, like, I always wanted to earn a living by writing. So, and I think that's the value of a good teacher, isn't it? Somebody who takes an interest, is very formative, is very, because I was 14-year-old idiot, like I didn't know what I was into or what I was good at, really. So that was very formative, and I think I've always been like an avid reader, consumer of media. When I was a kid, it was magazines. Yeah. It was skate films, snowboard films. I've always, whatever I've been into, music, I've been like, I've immersed myself in the culture of those things and the media of those things. So it was quite natural for me from a bit of an early age especially like in the early 1990s, where those snowboard media were very nascent. You know, there's that people literally building those industries, these ideas on the fly. So for me, that it was good timing, like to sort of look at that and firstly be able to be given opportunities, because at the end of the day, there weren't that many people that were around that could write, but also to think, oh yeah, maybe I could do that, like follow that avenue. So it's kind of how it came about, really.
And you talked then about the fact that your teacher described you as a I'm not sure the word you used, but let's say a good writer. I'm probably understating it when I use the word good. But now you're definitely a writer, this is clear, but you're also an entrepreneur, podcast host, producer, author, many other things as well. Dog owner, this is it. That wasn't on my list, but that's good to know. But yeah, I mean, you're much more than just a writer journalist. You're still a journalist as well. So how did those kind of early days of doing seasons, like you said, how did that develop to where you are now? So being a founder and a leader within your own kind of marketing business down in the south coast of the UK.
Well, I alluded to the fact that I was lucky. I was really lucky with the peer group that I had at that age. Like, I was lucky enough that to be very immersed in like the British snowboarding scene. And there's a lot of like really strong characters, a lot of entrepreneurs, to use the word that you've just used. That at the time you didn't really realize that what was going on. Like people starting magazines, people starting distribution companies, people becoming professionals at snowboarders or whatever. And obviously those are all acts of entrepreneurialism at the end of the day. And I was very fortunate that a couple of my friends, Ed Lee being one of them, Chris Moran, the lad I've mentioned, were very, very clear-sighted at that age. They were Chris a few years older than me, Ed a year or so older than me. So I met those lads and we were all big, like probably when I was about 19, 20. And we were a big peer group of, young lads wanting to go snowboarding basically. But there's a few people in that group who were driven, had ideas, already at that age was showing kind of vision, really. Ed was one, Chris was one, Stu Brass, another good friend of mine, was another. I was hugely influenced by them, really, because they were I'd seen that people could do it in the wider community. I was very influenced by a magazine called Read and Destroy, which is a skate mag. And I was very influenced by White Lines, the magazine that I was lucky enough to end up becoming editor of for quite a few years. Because again, it was a very DIY ethos. It was people making up as they went along and creating something from new. So all of those things were really important for me to make me realize that I didn't have to get a proper job. Like I could find a way of turning the passions that I had. And writing was on a par for me with skateboarding and snowboarding and surfing latterly. Not that I would skate anymore really, but how I could find a way to forge a career as a writer was as an important a motivation for me at the time. So those kind of mentors, leaders, influences, however you want to call it, there's loads more, to be honest, but they were super important. And so that kind of helped me to understand that you didn't have to lead a conventional working life. In terms of how it ended up here, I mean, I was actually thinking about this today because obviously we've been talking about having this chat for a while, and I was thinking, what we're going to talk about. Yeah, I mean, it's just a chain of events that have very randomly led here, really, but that have always been I've just always had a pretty clear idea about how I've wanted to express myself, and how I've wanted to what I think is, important for me, what I think is important to communicate, whether it's through the writing I was doing or whether it's these days like the campaigns that we're running through the agency. I've always had a pretty strong point of view. And as I got more confidence from my peer group and my friends, obviously that's then expressed itself and has enabled me to kind of those ideas, that viewpoint has evolved to the point where I've become confident enough to run a company and to balance all of these things as you described earlier. So, but I mean, that has taken 30 years, it's 30 years that I've known those boys, and it's 30 years that we've all been trying to do different things, more interesting things. So it's all been part of that story, really. I think these things that you mentioned are they're obviously the stages along the way, really, and this is the kind of current stage, I would say.
Because now I look at my notes. In fact, it's 20 years next year, right? Since actually you founded.
20 years ACM, yeah.
So and then I think 10 years before as editor of White Lines.
Exactly, yeah.
So that changed because going from, maybe you'll tell me otherwise, but going from, let's say, a steady and a safe salary paycheck every month to giving that up and starting our own at that you're 25, so you were
29.
So
that's 28 actually,
so taking that step was still a pretty
well, I mean, we got fired, so
okay, so strong motivation.
So and that. Yeah, I mean, well, we did. I mean, that's what happened. Whatever, it's not a big deal. It's just part of these tales, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I don't want to overstate that as if like I ran White Lines, because that's not true. I was lucky. Was very lucky. So I was at White Lines from when I was like 20 to when I was 28. So it's about 8 years, like basically my whole 20s, and it was an amazing opportunity. There was money around. There was ad budgets, so we could do stuff, And it was me, it was Ed, it was Chris, it was a guy called Nick Hamilton who ended up becoming pretty much the most respected snowboard photographer in the world. It was a guy called Chod who was the editor in chief and the designer, and and latterly a guy called James McPhail and another friend called Ed Blumfield, and we had an amazing gig. Like we were able to fuck about and put a magazine together and do a lot of traveling, so for me it was amazing, and anyway, I don't need to go into it too much. It's not a very interesting story, but we ended up leaving. We kind of got the owner, Jim, who's still a friend of mine, Jim Peskett, who you might know, is really well known around the game. He decided to make a change. At the time we were up in arms, whatever, but these days I've seen Jim, we just laugh about it. I mean, the funny thing, thinking back, just as an aside, is I'm good because that publishing company also used to run a magazine called Sidewalk, which was the main UK skate mag, and a mag called Surface Pass. There's a big group of us that all grew up doing that. We're all still friends, So, and a friend of mine, Ben Powell, who was the editor of Sidewalk, I spoke to him for my podcast a couple of years ago, and we were talking about all this. And he was like, how old Jim was when all that happened, right? And I was like, in my head, he was like 50 or something. He's like 35. But we just thought he was like this old man, But he was just a few years older than us, trying to run a business with all these young idiots, So he made a decision to make a change, which I subsequently have got a lot of sympathy for, much more than I had at the time. And yeah, I mean, it was my friend Chris, so when we'd been doing the magazine, at that point you're in this sort of cultural sweet spot of snowboarding, if you like the late 90s, early 2000s. It's when all the brands think it's really trendy and they've got money, so there's a lot of outside money coming in. There's loads of my peers that are still in the industry worked for brands that were or marketing agencies and stuff. And we used to get a lot of those gigs, which we didn't really, occasionally a brand would hit us up and be like, can you help us put a team together or run an event? And we were just always a bit like, yeah, okay, we could do that. Never really joined the dots as to what that could be. And when that ended, White Lines, Chris kind of said to me, we should just set up a company. And at the time, and I had nothing else to do, so I just was again kind of followed Chris really, and was like, yeah, let's do that. That sounds like what we'll do. But at the time, we saw it as a freelance writing business because we were still journalists, So the first gig we got a gig to write a book for a company called Footprint. We wrote a travel guide called Snowboarding the World, because obviously we'd spent 10 years traveling the world snowboarding. So we were like, we could write a guidebook, So we did. So we pitched this company, and they gave us budget to do that. So we got another couple of years of like, wringing the rag dry, getting to go snowboarding. And that was the start of what has become ACM essentially. So we for the first, this is 2005. Then a friend of mine, Ben Mundy, who's an Aussie surf journalist, joined probably 2007. So for like the first 5 years, it was really three of us just still really acting as journalists and doing the occasional marketing gig. It only really began to turn into what it is now around 2010, 2011. And at that point, that's when I began to think, actually, there's an opportunity here to do something that's a bit more fully formed, So yeah, that was kind of the beginning of how we ended up at this bit.
Maybe then at that point, how did you find that transition then from, as you said, basically doing, as you described it, some freelance work to actually really starting to think about establishing a company, establishing a business? And
I didn't have a clue what I was doing. Okay. I literally had no idea what we were doing. So we worked it out as we went, no plan in the slightest.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's still the case, to be honest. It's all from experience and making mistakes.
Okay. And when you look back at those early days, so it sounds like, and it was a lot of kind of test and learn, almost like a bit of a fast failing mentality.
A lot of clueless pitching. Yeah. Like a lot of absolutely getting in rooms and delivering a lot of like getting meetings. And there's a lot of that in this business, isn't there? And a lot of working out what we were selling, a lot of working out like what the proposition was. Yeah. A lot of working out how to earn money, really doing that, to be honest, because obviously the theme of that 30 years that I've just talked to you, like being a freelancer, and I would still count myself as a freelancer, really, even though it's probably a bit of a stupid comment because I run a company, but the principle is still the same. Like, you have to work out like how to earn money in an unconventional way. I mean, that's as good a definition of being a freelancer as you could probably, it's a fair definition, right? So I think I still do that. Like, that's still what I do. Like, I still work out. My role at ACM is leading the company, and working out, bringing in money, like forging relationships, or, whatever business development stuff. Not too interesting to go into in too much detail, but that was what I was learning back then, for sure. Yeah. How do you actually do this? Like, how do you actually get people to give you these budgets or these clients, or, and yeah, when I think back, like, definitely cringe a lot at some of the, but like, whatever, it's just how you learn, right? I'm not embarrassed by that. I think it's absolutely, I mean, world's biggest business cliche alert, but it is true, isn't it? Like, the point isn't that you're going to make mistakes. The trick is how you recover from them and what you learn from them. That is, I mean, it's not rocket science. That is the deal, isn't it? So whenever anyone at work that works for us now makes a mistake, I'm always a bit like, just don't worry about it. Like, it's going to happen. I made one yesterday and I'll make another one tomorrow. Like, but if you keep making the same one, that might be a bit of a problem. Sure. So that's been the theme, really. But even that, like, I would say, is still a constantly for me, as in, and then by, through the company as well, it's still a complete ongoing process.
Yeah. And probably always will be at the end of the day, whether it's you or...
Well, it's why I enjoy it, though. It's why I enjoy what I do, because I'm lucky enough that I do quite a few, I really enjoy my podcast. That's also, I'm lucky enough that that's quite successful. And I've had a couple of friends go like, why don't you just concentrate on that and not do ACM? And I'm a bit like, for me, ACM is a creative problem. Well, that sound like an idiot, I wouldn't describe myself as an entrepreneur, but I guess by definition that's what it is, But I just think they are creative problems, aren't they? They're intellectual problems, businesses, like how you run them, how you like culture is a hugely important thing for us, as every agency in the world says that, but it is genuinely a very important thing for us. And how you balance culture, people, profit, doing good work, doing creative work is a constant, ongoing intellectual and creative problem. That's the reason I still do it, really, because that's the bit that I enjoy.
Well, we'll come back to the culture topic, because I know that that's a particularly strong kind of driver for you, something that's really important. And obviously you've made some changes recently connected to that. But I wanted to just get your perspective of, over those 30 years, you know, the action sports market, the industry has changed dramatically. I mean, to your point of your time at White Lines, which was probably the heyday somehow.
Well, people that write for snowboard mags now are still getting paid what we got paid back then, which I think is it's like the Big Mac price metric, isn't it? You know, so I pitched I did a story for a snowboard mag last year, and I was like, that is literally what I got paid in like 1998. That is, which is quite funny, isn't it?
So how, other than the fact that the salaries of those positions haven't changed in that time?
Well, if I could just say as well, like a complete digression, but that you cannot run those entities at this point unless you're prepared to exploit people. That is the case. And now, exploit might be too harsh a word, but those business models do not stack up. Like, so if you're going to run like a surf mag or a snow mag, you cannot pay people properly. That is the fact of the matter. Like, and that is a problem, if you ask me. So that has, like, I was lucky. We didn't make a fortune back then, but we made enough money to like, for me to have a career. I didn't come from, you haven't got money. Do you know what I mean? I had to earn the money that I earned to go and do that. Obviously the problem you've got now is that it narrows the field to the point that only people that do have a certain amount of financial freedom can do it. So although I made a bit of a glib comment there, like, that is a problem, I think, in the industry, and one that, I mean, I talk about it quite a lot on my podcast, really, and I'm quite vociferous about making sure people are paid properly, because it's an issue, really, you know.
And does this, and yeah, we've gone off on a tangent. No, but it's a good point, because I think this goes back to a topic we were talking about before we started recording about AI. And is it a risk, actually, that because these types of magazines, as an example, are not able to pay for
well, people still do it. I mean, let's not
okay.
I think the point is that people these magazines still exist. Like, you know, there's still good people writing for them. There's still good photographers working for them. They're just not getting paid properly. You know, that's the fact of the matter.
If in the last 30 years, 25 years, let's say, those salaries haven't changed, let's assume that that trend continues. So those salaries don't stay the same, but the money that the businesses have are maybe getting less, as they have done.
Yeah.
If that kind of curve, if the salary's here, the income's here, then at one point, will there be people that are willing to do that? And will that task of writing, of creating kind of engaging content, will that disappear and be taken up by AI?
No, I don't think so. I think you're always going to get people that are going to want to do it. I mean, I still, for what it's worth, write for those magazines for shit money. I mean, in a way, I think that perpetuates the problem, because I'm privileged enough to I could do it for free, really, at this point, you know. So in a way, I'm like, by lending those entities my labor for a cut price, like, I'm propping up their inefficient business model at the end of the day. I mean, you know, a few years ago, a friend of mine got offered editorship of a UK surf mag, and I'm not going to name it, but a well-known one. And he said to me, like, can I ask your opinion on this? He's like got a normal job. For him, it was a bit of a break, you know. He's a really talented journalist. And he said to me, like, I've been offered this job to run this magazine. Can I run the budget past you? And I said, sure. So he phones me up, he tells me the budget. And the budget was a joke. But the budget was like, again, I'm not going to be specific, but the point is that what they were asking him to deliver for the budget was the whole editorial, you know, the lot. His salary, the contributors, the photographers. the designer, you know, like everything that you need to put out one of these magazines. And I was just like, well, the only way you're going to be able to do that is by completely exploiting people. Like, you know, you're going to have to ask people to work for free. You're going to have to ask people to not get paid properly. You won't get paid properly. That's a bit of a problem, really, you know, if that's the only way that that magazine can exist. And no one's putting a gun to the publishers of that magazine's head and saying to them, like, you know, it's not some act of munificence. Like, they'll be making money. Do you know what I mean? Like, because they'll be getting advertising. And the only way they can make that work is by squeezing the editorial staff. Now, I do it because I have a romantic, you know, there's a whole strain of romanticism around these magazines and these and print generally and all that. And, you know, that because people feel that strongly and they have an emotional attachment to these titles, then they will do it, which is how it perpetuates. I don't think that'll ever change. You know, there's always going to be kids that want to start who will work for shit money and don't have any clue they're being exploited in doing so. There'll always be people like me who are a bit older and they'll be like, oh yeah, I'll do that. Like, why not? That'd be a nice trip down memory lane. You know, easy to do that. But that's, I think, unless you kind of have that conversation. Same with events though. I mean, events are the same. Events don't pay people properly. You know, there's a whole like seam of this in our industry where ultimately the collars don't match the cuff. Like, you know, people are trying to produce stuff, but not for whatever reason. And it's probably another podcast, right? But it is a thing that. So to answer your question, like, I don't necessarily think it will be the end of it, but I just think it'll get worse, really, because you know, as you know, I think the point you're making, aren't you, is that there's less money in the industry and things are getting squeezed more, brands getting squeezed more, and everyone that relies on those budgets, whether it's me running an agency, whether it's a magazine after advertising, an athlete, you know, whatever, like the people that kind of put the cultural bones on this thing, you know, will suffer from that, won't they? Yeah. Really. So I just think it'll kind of get worse. But that's why, like, with what we do and with what I do, I'm quite boring people to tears, like through whether it's through my podcast or the people that work for me saying, and my business partner Jojo, and kind of saying, now we've got to pay people properly because at this point it's the principle of the thing. Yeah. You know, it's about what's an equitable industry look like, you know, and my kind of view is if you can't pay people properly, you've got a problem with your business model. Really. I don't see how you could not fess up to that. Yeah, really, absolutely. You know, you're either being really disingenuous and you're just skimming, or you can't afford it, in which case, what are you doing? What are you doing if that's the case?
So going back to the original point, so what have been the big changes in the industry that you've seen over those 30 years, or maybe let's say 20 years since you started ACM, that have really impacted the business, and how have you been able to adapt to those changes?
Well, obviously there's like the bigger ticket things, you know, the internet, AI, as you've described, you know, the huge cultural shifts in society that every business has to adapt to. I mean, we're not immune to that, like no business is. So that's the thing, definitely. You know, I think that little thread we just talked about there is a perfect example of that. You know, we talked about white lines having in the late 90s, early 2000s. There was money around in the last throes of the analog media era, you know, before the internet came in and changed that business model. So that was definitely a thing. And that, as we've described, led me to setting up my company, because the reason that my boss at the time needed to get rid of us was because he was going through the same thing, you know. So I was impacted by that, and again, did not realize that at the time. In terms of like since ACM, I mean, you know, the usual stuff, COVID, the definitely like the financial crisis in 2008 was pretty huge. That was. I remember having a conversation with Chris where we were like, we might have to get a proper job here. You know, this is getting really serious. And we ended up that, you know, that really forced us to kind of get professional and serious quite quickly at the time, because that was only 3 years in when we essentially didn't know what we were doing. So that was certainly a thing. I think obviously there's a lot of dialogue right now around brands and agencies struggling in the industry. I think you probably hear that a lot through doing this, right? I think we what I do is incredibly niche at the end of the day. Like, it just is. Like, and what ACM do is niche. And I think that has been a real advantage over the years, really, because there's not many people that can really do what you sound like arrogant or whatever, but it's just that's what niche is, right? Like, it's just, you have and that's certainly the case with ACM. And when I was younger, I guess I used to think that was a disadvantage. And that's probably like, certainly in journalism, you know, like classic, didn't really appreciate what a good gig I had at the time. Always harbored ambitions to write for newspapers and, you know, magazines and those legacy media that kind of felt to me that they had a bit more cachet for as an outlet for my ambition, if you like. Do you know what I mean? Like, now I look back and I'm thinking, wow, that was really lucky that I didn't pursue that career, because a lot of my peers in journalism, for example, aren't working in journalism anymore because of it, for all the reasons we've just discussed. Like, it's really hard to make a living in journalism now. But because I had this really specific thing that I was able to talk about through my work, I kind of escaped that. It's kind of been the same story with ACM, really. I think early on we made the mistake, you know, I was talking about cringing about some of the stuff that we did. You know, we kind of went for gigs we had no right doing, we had no business doing. You know, we're competing with agencies that are like, you know, way better, whatever. It's an old story, right? Yeah. What we've got a lot better at, and what I've got better at, is appreciating what we're good at, what we can do that is uniquely us, that other people can't do, and communicating that to the types of brands that we want to work with in a way that's going to sort of solve their problems, you know. So, and that's definitely last 18 months. We rebranded 18 months ago. We've got a lot better at talking about that in the last 18 months. And that's kind of working, you know. When I have conversations with like clients or new businessy conversations, that's what they are seeing, you know. So I think that is the thread, really, to answer your question of what has helped us navigate. Because, you know, it's the same for if you're going to try and do something for 30 years, whoever you are, whether you work, you know, if you worked down the mines in the 70s, you probably thought you had a job for life, right? 10 years later, your entire industry's been decimated. That's just the deal. Like, that's just how capitalism works. Like, so if you're lucky enough to find a way of having I come back to that phrase, point of view, really, like a point of view that enables you to sort of navigate that. I don't think you can do much more than that, really, because there's so many vagaries, there's so many factors, events that you have zero control over, that are going to impact you. So really, I think I've just got a lot better at almost like, you know, owning that perspective, owning that, and I would say that's the answer to that question, really.
Because I think there's two things there. There's the niche, which I fully agree. I think there's an ongoing need for people looking that are specialists in different areas, different industries. I think that's going to, if anything, become more and more important. Otherwise, it's the very big companies that work with the very big companies, and they're okay. That's fine, you know. Yeah. But I think that your point about you know, having a point of view, having a perspective that has maybe honed over those years. What's helped you kind of hone that? Because I think that's something that's quite difficult for people to understand, and it's something that I struggle with as well personally. Where, you know, for me, from an industry point of view, from a business point of view, for me, it's very clear. You know, it's niche as well. I mean, it's the same niche pretty much. Yeah. But it's always that point of view that sometimes I struggle with, because I don't know whether it's because I'm too easily influenced.
It is really hard to answer. Like, what I recognized in my friends that influenced me was they had a point of view. Okay. You know, like I couldn't have ever articulated that in that way, but it was enough for me to want to follow them. You know, it's like leadership is quite often about having a point of view that you can express in a way that'll take people with you. That's kind of it, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, and so that was a really important lesson to me early on. Like, and then I kind of realized through my work that the stuff that I did that had a point of view, and I've always been opinionated, you know, I've always been somebody who's like, a gobshite who can sound off about stuff. I've always had opinions about things that I knew about. I'm not somebody that, as much as people that know me will probably laugh about this, like I don't really tend to, I want to, it needs to be grounded in what I understand and feel like confident enough to express it, you know, because then it has a ring of kind of another dickish word, but authenticity about it, right? Like that's what people respond to. So I think I kind of recognized that. I recognized it, and I tried to increasingly, but you can recognize that in anything. You can recognize that in art and music and creativity, and you know, why do people like Tom Waits, who has got the weirdest voice ever, and you know, makes music with like pots and pans, and because he's expressing a point of view. Like it's an emotional Bob Dylan. I mean, how do you explain that? You know, like these people have. So it's not an original insight at all. Like this is just. But I think like I just kind of. I'm not even going to say realize that, but I followed that, you know, through what I did. And then marketing, I mean, you know, Christ, marketing is just so full of shit, isn't it? So like, you know, when people in marketing definitely follow what they think you should do. You know, what people in marketing say is, we should do that rather than should we do that. You know, that, and I see that at work, you know, like with younger people that come to work for us who desperately want to have a good career, and they desperately want to, and they'll come up with ideas that you just know that they're only doing because they've seen that, they think that's what you do, you know. And whereas the question that they should ask is like, well, should we do that? Why should we do that? You know, trusting that and being quite bolshy about that has been really important in ACM, like in terms of like, and also internally in terms of like the culture of the place, in encouraging people to stand up for their own point of view, because it's hard, isn't it? You know, you just said that you're really experienced, right? I mean, one of the things we always have at work is, you know, I want people to tell me what I'm doing wrong, like, but then I'm the boss, so like I can say that until I'm blue in the face, but until people see evidence that they're not going to get in trouble for doing that, they are not going to do it, you know. So like, internally it's the conversation we have all the time to just say to people like, you're allowed to have a point of view, like you are not going to get in trouble for that. And even what you were saying in terms of like, you find it really hard, everyone finds it hard. You know, if you go in a room with people that you perceive to be more experienced than you or more talented than you, it's incredibly hard to stick your hand up and say like, what about my point of view? You know, but if you do, they're going to respect you. They're going to listen. Conversely, that's why you should do it. But it is really hard. So I think like that is like, I'm not sat here saying like that was something that I discerned all the way through in the slightest. But the last few years, I've been a bit like, well, maybe that's what experience is. Yeah. You know, like maybe that's what experience means, that you've earned the right a little bit more to do that. And you know, and the mistakes that we spoke about are a building block of that experience as well. But that's one of the things that I love about working with young people that work for us. Like when, you know, we've got an amazing team at the minute, and you know, seeing younger people like have the confidence to do that and come in and we've been lucky enough to have people recently come in and be like, no, actually we need to do it this way. You know, I'm like, that's music to my ears. That's what I want to hear, you know? So yeah, but I think it's crucial. I think if you don't have it, then you're not going to make good work, and you're not going to have anything that people are really going to want to buy at the end of the day, are you? Yeah. You know,
when you're talking about having young members of the team, when you're looking for new members of the team, what are you looking for when you're looking for people? Because that sort of thing is quite difficult to identify, especially in an interview, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about recruitment recently because I don't think we've always got recruitment right. I think like a lot of agencies our side, I think recruitment's so fascinating, right? Isn't it? Because it's like it's a very old school process. Let's just put it that way. Like it's one of those processes where there's a way of doing it. And we've been completely guilty of this. And this is what I've kind of actually realized in the last, I'd say like few months really, you know, you apply for it, you put a job out, you use the same language, historically very dry language. You know, people send you CVs. Like, what is a CV? Like, you know, and they get that from it's just all these processes, all these kind of conventions is a better word, right? That are followed. And then you do the interviews and then you get the references. And I'm a bit like, one of the things I think we're going to do in the next few months is actually like completely look at that and think about like, actually, let's forget that. Like what's the best thing that we need to do? Because I strongly feel that like pitching and applying for a job is a pitch. Let's be clear, you know, like is about the problem that you're solving for the other person. That's what your job is, isn't it? As the person, like anyone that's going to pay somebody to do something has a problem, whether that's like a leaky tap or like a marketing campaign. And a pitch is about like, I can solve your problem in a way that's going to, I mean, that's what it is, right? So, and what we get loads at work, which is really nice, because people are like responding to, the number one thing we hear is like, I want to work for you because you've got great brands and you all get to go snowboarding and the culture's great. A problem that we don't have is a lack of people who want to do that right now, you know? So like, but what we do have is people that can like have a point of view, you know, that can come in and that can just even show that in any way, to be honest. Like, so I mentioned before we started recording, we've just advertised for like a copywriter role and 80 applicants. I think there was 3 that we went with in the end. The only reason was because I was like, well, that's slightly interesting, you know, like that's, you know, they're not using like, we are delighted to announce on their mock-up press release that they're sending over, you know what I mean? They're not copying the conventions. So that is the answer to that question. Like, we want people, I'm really overusing this phrase, but like people with their own take, their own perspective and the confidence to express it. I think the rest of it, like obviously you need to have the experience to do the nuts and bolts of the job. But I think that's what the people that have thrived at our place are those people, those people that have come in and they just bring something new and they bring a freshness and I think we've got a lot better, but nowhere near good enough. But I think that's what we're looking for and what we need more of, you know.
How would you define the culture of ACM and how did you get to what that is? Because I know, for example, that you're a fully remote business, and I think probably somehow that is connected either directly or indirectly to the culture.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing, loads of mistakes. Like, you know, I think early on we made the classic mistakes that all businesses do, which is like we mistook perks for culture. Yeah. You know, so we were a bit like, but we didn't have the basics right. I mean, ultimately, I want to run a place to work that is a good place to work, you know, like, and I think that starts with the absolute basics. You get paid right. You get decent maternity leave. You know, you're not being hassled when you're off duty. Yeah. You get training, you get supported, you get to feel like you've got a voice, you get to feel like you can do good work. Those are the building blocks of a decent job, right? Yeah. And I am not for 1 minute saying we have not got all that right. There's no doubt about that. So that is really important. And then on top of that, I guess it's just like an idea, you know, like what I've always tried to sort of like, what I talked about earlier about like feeling like I've never had a proper job and all that kind of cheesy cliche stuff, which at this point just sounds like, I mean, I kind of cringe even like saying that stuff, but that was all true, you know, and that is still pretty true. You know, I'm 50 in a couple of years. I've never actually had a proper job. Like, I wanted the business to be an extension of that, like, you know, so that people could have the same experience that I did, really. you know, through an ordinary job. So that has always been the goal, really. Like, and loads and loads and loads of mistakes along the way in terms of like, so going remote was a big part of that, because ultimately, I mean, again, like I just thought a lot of it was down to like this sort of convention stuff as well. Like for quite a few years, like we had an office in the centre of Brighton, we had a showroom, you know, we paid loads of money for that office, and we had like a big posh meeting room and all that stuff, and no one ever really came. Like it was cool when we had clients down, and it looked, but for years I was like, this is a colossal waste of money, you know. And again, it's like, it's that thing, you know, we still get it from clients, weirdly, you know. Some clients are still like, oh, well, we're only going to take an agency with a showroom, and I'm always a bit like, what is this? It's like 1990. Like, who cares? Like, you know, like that's weird, you know, because it's a convention thing, isn't it? It's like it's one of those things again where it's like, we must have an agency with a showroom in London, you know, like we must have blah blah.
Ticking a box. I
don't know what it is. Like, you know, again, it's not like, and that agency actually really good at what they do, and they're going to be able to like, again, solve my problem or like get me. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you're going to make a decision about that based on whether they've got a showroom, I'm like, that's just odd to me. So like that was like, or like the press day or the press dinner. It's just all these things that people have done for years that like, if you actually like sat down and planned it now, would you invent that? I doubt it, to be honest. So, you know, that was one of those things, the office, where I was like, I don't think we need this really. The other thing was that obviously asking people to move to Brighton to come was limiting the talent pool, to use another shit phrase. That was a problem. So we, and then like we wanted to give the staff the freedom to choose their own time. You know, we were getting to the point where people are having kids, super important. You know, like can they be flexible with their days? Can they decide when they go and pick their kids up? Can we remove the commute time? I mean, you know, we have people commuting from London. It's like 2 hours a day. I mean, who wants to do that? Like, so we went remote January 2020, which is incredibly lucky, obviously, because that was like and we were set up, which is great. And we just got rid of our office, I think, the day of lockdown. Wow. Incredibly lucky, you know, like, but we had made that decision, and we had done that work, like to do that. So that was a huge thing. So I think, you know, we also got better at like, if people wanted to leave, that was kind of fine. If it's not for you, if you get to the point you get a better job, go for it. You know, if you decide it's not for you, it's not personal. It's just life, right? If you got to get rid of someone because it hasn't worked out, just make that call. You know, like early on, again, took all that way too personally. Took all that like, saw it as a real failure of, you know, it's just the reality of running companies, isn't it? You know, so I think we got a lot better at kind of working out what the reality of a good culture meant, you know, like, and it doesn't mean you bring pizza in on a Friday or you give people free kit. It means like, do they wake up on a Monday and dread go to work or not? You know, can they be honest to their boss? Can they be confident they're going to get paid over maternity leave? You know, it's that stuff, isn't it? So I think I still think we got a long way to go. But I think what's really nice right now is that like people do buy into the idea of it. Like the people that work for us, they're into it. Yeah. You know, they think it's a great place to work, and they are protective of that. You know, especially the people that have been there for a while. Yeah. They're a bit like, they're the guardians of it more than me and Jojo at this point. You know, they're the ones that are like, no, this is a good thing. You know, we got to protect this, which is obviously really nice. You know, so that was a bit like the employee ownership thing that we've just brought in, which I'm sure you were going to ask me about. Like, yeah, like that was a huge part of that, like to codify that, to put our money where our mouth is a bit, you know, and be like, yeah, actually, if we're going to do this, like, let's really give them an incentive. Let's really get them on board. And like, I strongly feel that like the company will be a healthier, more proficient, more efficient place that does better work if we give our staff more involvement. Like if we blur the lines between like leadership and team. That's my experience of it. So I want to do more of that.
How's that going to work practically? I mean, do you remain as the, I hate the word, but as the boss?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, like, it's a pretty well-worn thing. It's not like we haven't reinvented anything. It's like we're doing a 5-year EMI scheme. So we've put in like a certain number of our shares, and it's just based upon years at the company. A lot of companies do it hierarchically. We didn't want to do that because my view is that an account exec has the same impact on a client, for example, as I do. More probably. They're on the account every day. So we decided to just make it like the validity was how long you've been there. Okay. So we got 5. That's going to run for 5 years. At the end of that, it's tied to, it's a bit of an exit plan as well. We've been doing this a while. I'm very happy. I think that's a legitimate thing for me and Jojo to be like, what are we actually doing here? Like we're very definitely middle-aged. I've been doing this 30 years. Like, do I want to be doing this when I'm 60? Probably not, really. And that is not that far away. So there was that element, and we don't have a lot of options. Like, you can sell it, you can, it's kind of it, really. We can keep going, or we can eventually try and go employee owned. So, and we're at that point where we do get a lot of, I mean, I'm sure it's this thing for most businesses our side. We do get people contacting us to sell. Most of them, I'm a bit like, you've written that on AI. you don't know anything. You don't know anything about our company, and I'm certainly not going to sell it to you. So there's an exit element. So it's going to run for 5 years. At the end of that 5 years, we're going to sell ACM to a new company, which will be employee owned by me and Jojo and everybody who's completed the MI scheme. So we will, at that point, like, because currently we're the 2 shareholders, and we, it's the UN and we're America kind of vibe, like at that point, then everybody that's completed it will be on the board and it will be employee owned. So that's the way it's going to work, basically.
Did that take a lot of reflection, or was it a reasonably easy decision? I mean, you said, okay, you had 3 options, but still, I think for a lot of people, not an easy option to take. So was it something that you had to?
No, not at all. No, we were into it. No, we were like, yeah, that's definitely what we should do. It took a while to work out how it was going to work and work out what the financial, path looks like to make it worthwhile. Because obviously we're a business, so we have a plan. We have targets. We have boring shit, but we do. And so it's a 5-year plan, which is based upon that. But equally, I sort of strongly feel that symbolically it's a good thing to do. There's a lot of businesses, for example, like becoming B Corps right now. Like a lot of businesses in our game, particularly in our industry, are grappling with this like question of like, how do you run a business in a climate apocalypse? Like I mean, it's kind of true, right? Like, how do you what does that look like? And for a lot of companies, it's like the B Corp route. I mean, that's why people are doing it, right? It's like we sort of thought about that. I'm not a huge fan of that platform or idea personally. I don't really understand what it accomplishes. I think for some businesses, they have it like they do set themselves up differently so that, like, for example, the money isn't just all going to shareholders, or they change their production processes. But from what I can see, that isn't the case for everyone, and ultimately those businesses just still run in the same way, and they just get a nice little mark and they can talk about it in their marketing, but they still, you know what I mean? Like, so we looked at that and I was a bit like, well, I don't buy that really. So for us, like, changing our ownership structure to benefit our staff, which has always been like such a key part of it, was that made sense in the kind of, we're a market agency at the end of the day. Like, we help brands sell shit. Yeah. It's just what we do. Like, we have to be honest about that. We have to acknowledge that we can't really, the only way we could impact footprint wise would be to close, really. If you were being honest about that. But I think you can have a different impact if you redivert your profits to your staff, for example, and change because I don't know what that's going to look like in 5 years when you've got people that aren't me running it, and I'm going to have to trust that. And there's people in my company and Jojo's company who have very different views that I do about the way that the world should run and the way that the company should run, and they will have a louder voice. So I'm interested in seeing what that looks like personally. So on a lot of levels, it made a lot of sense to us. And I think we were just pretty fired up about it. I think we just thought it was a really good idea and kind of kept it interesting as well, on the whole intellectual challenge front. Yeah. So one of the great outcomes of it will be that we'll just be even more transparent with our staff, and we'll just get them even more involved in understanding like the impact that their decisions have on the outcome of what the work they do, like on the small level, but on the wider level, what they can get out of that company if we're lucky enough for it to sort of continue to succeed.
To your point about other people having let's say a louder or a stronger voice in 5 or however many years, that will also, of course, potentially also impact the culture. And that will evolve. And going back to the topic around having a perspective, having a point of view, all of that will evolve, will shift.
I can't keep telling the same story about white lines for another 30 years. Well, I'm being serious though. Like it has to be, at some point it has to be somebody else's story, right? Because you can't, and so that's also a big part of it. Like it has to be the people in my team that are in their 20s. So at some point it has to become their story. So the sooner that like we can facilitate that in the right way, then the better, as far as I'm concerned.
This came up actually in a podcast a few episodes ago. The guest was saying that I guess authenticity reasons to a certain extent had to turn away a client because they felt that wasn't aligned to their values or their mission. Is that something that you've had to, you faced that?
Yeah, well, we got asked to pitch for a gig for Saudi.
Oh, wow.
So, which we said no to. Yeah. And again, that's probably kind of silly to people, and that some people listen to this because they might be like the old classic, like, well, you're going to go and fill your car up with petrol, but you're not going to, but I don't know. For me, that was a bit of I wouldn't work with a tobacco company. I wouldn't. Yeah, I don't know. It's just a personal, I have my own views on that stuff. And that's a constant battle, isn't it? You can have all the kind of principles in the world and, but you do have to run a company. Yeah. So I think, again, we're lucky enough these days that we don't have to do work that we don't want to do. Yeah. But in the past, we've certainly done stuff that I'd rather not have done because it meant putting food on the table, Yeah. I think that's a kind of fact of life, isn't it?
We talked you talked already about people that have influenced you throughout your career. But is there anybody particularly since you started ACM that has been maybe an influence or somebody that you've kind of looked at and aspired to kind of go in the direction that they've been going?
Yeah, we've got a non-exec director who has been really helpful. Like I kind of got to the point with ACM when Jojo went on her first maternity leave. So I think that was 2016. And Chris had just left. He was a founding partner and he'd left. So it went from like 3 of us to me, and we were growing. And I was a bit like, I'm actually at the limit of my ability to do this now in terms of like business acumen, So I just really wanted to find somebody who could come in and answer what would be a lot of boring, technical, but very obvious business questions. So he's now still involved. He's on our board. He's incredibly helpful and has been a huge influence on the company. I mean, we pay him obviously, and he charges through the nose. But like that, yeah, he's been a massive influence and helped me. A lot, as you probably gathered, like a lot of it was kind of just worked out.
Yeah.
No real business grounding, and then as we grew, I was like, oh God, we better get that all worked out. if we're going to be profitable, and I better work out what all this means. And, so he was brilliant for that. In terms of like other individuals, I mean, I'd still just say my peers, really, like a lot of friends that I've grown up with that are still doing their own thing, running their own businesses that I see. I got a good friend, Les, for example. He's just one of my old mates who's like a bit like me, like had a similar career to me. He's been trying to he's got a really great thing at the minute called Rematch Live, which is a really great event platform that he's been, I've watched that for like 6 years. I've seen what he's gone through to do that. I went and saw it last year and saw what he'd created, and I'm inspired by that, like he's taking risks. He's only doing that because he's driven by the same thing that's a bit of a theme of this conversation. He just wants to have a bit more of an interest in life at the end of the day, Well, I'm not going to be like, Marcus Aurelius or anyone like that. The Stoics. Yeah. Not for me, Clive. No.
Other than your day-to-day professional life, what role does sports and being outside kind of play in your life?
Yeah, massive. Always has done. Yeah. More important as I get older.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I'm very active still. Swim, run, surf. Don't skate really. Every like year or so I'll be like, I should go skating again, and then absolutely eat shit and remember why I don't do it. Snowboarding, yeah. I mean, I think one of the great things like as I've got older with those activities, surfing and snowboarding in particular, is like it's all really boiled down. When I was in my 20s, I was like everyone. I was never very good really compared to a lot of my peers. Like, I was growing up with like, my friends were all like the best professionals in the country, and and then when I worked at Wildlands, I'm like literally hanging out with the best snowboarders in the world. If I'm being honest, I had a bit of a hard time with that, because if you're gonna compare yourself to those people, you are very much gonna fall up short. And I was just like an average snowboarder, like anyone, like like ordinary person who's into it because they were into it. So like when I've got older, like I went riding with Chris actually, who now lives in the French Alps, in February. I went and stayed with him for a week, and we had a day like in Maribor where we did 5 seasons, and we spent the day bombing around, doing little side hits and being way worse than we were in our 20s. But it was brilliant, and it was like, same with surfing. Like my only ambition in surfing, again, I'm a completely average surfer, like is to do like a good turn, at some point. So I really like the fact that it's boiled down to those very simple things now, and the kind of pressure that I felt when I was younger to like, which is all obviously completely in my own head, as it often is when you're younger, it's just gone. So but it's super important.
Does it help you kind of disconnect from work? Is it a bit of a kind of stress reliever, or a cure, not cure, but a support from a mental health point of view, or do you just?
Yeah, I mean, my wife's always a bit like, you're like a dog. Like if you don't go for it, if you don't do it, you're a pain in the ass. Like, do you know what I mean? So like yes, I recognize that, but it's more that really. It's an energy. I'd say it's more an outlet to turn my brain off a little bit. And my brain is pretty constantly going, okay. So like, I don't mind that at all. Like that's how it is. And most of it's kind of interesting. But it's, one of the reasons I really like swimming is because, like a lot of these things, like people like yoga, like people like meditation, breath work, all that stuff, because it is just a bit like you turn your brain off for an hour while you just concentrate on breathing, So I do. Yeah, that stuff is true, isn't it? It works. Yeah. It's not a revelation, is it? It's just that we're humans. We obviously need that on some kind of level, don't we? So yeah, I make a point of if I don't do, I'm most days I'm doing something.
And it's interesting you said there that you feel like your brain is pretty constant. If you're not doing something like that, your brain is constantly going. And as I reflected before we started recording, I look at everything that you do, and I mean, it feels like your brain would have to be pretty constant to be able to maintain that. So how do you find, are you able to find a balance between your personal relationships, the business, spending time in doing sport?
Yeah, well, we do, I'm not a parent, so that's obviously helpful in terms of like having more time. So there's that. I mean, again, it's a constant. I mean, me and my wife talk about that a lot. Like we just bought a place in Normandy, and that's a big project. That's like a 5-year project. So it's her project. She's a builder and a carpenter, and I'm pretty useless, really. And one of the things we've been talking about is like, she's been a bit like, how do we like channel your bullshit towards this thing? Like really, that's what the conversation's about. She's very polite about it, She's been very tactful about it, but that's kind of what she's saying, because I do take on a lot of stuff. I do enjoy it. I take on a lot of random stuff as well. I do, and also like podcasting has led to some interesting things. Like I do a lot of live stuff these days. I do a lot of online stuff in front of an audience. I've just made a documentary that's took me like 18 months. Like there's always interesting stuff to do, I've been asked to like judge a literary prize this summer, so it's meant I've like had to read like 12 books, so my wife is very much like, to answer your question, like, yeah, how do we sort of channel that a little bit more constructively for the next 8 weeks while we're in France, But so I think I'm getting better at that. But I think, I guess you just got to be mindful of it and have those conversations, right? Which I'm not always good at, because sometimes if I've got a lot on, I'll definitely get a bit of a game face on and, be up at 5 and, working all day, whatever, like you just, and then I've tried to be a bit easier on myself, like, and just not say yes to everything as well. Yeah. Like we're going to go to France for 8 weeks or 7 or 8 weeks. So I've actually for once in my life, like pretty much cleared the decks for that. We'll see if I can actually do that.
What are the best and the worst things about the action sports industry?
The best and the worst things. Well, I mean, again, I feel like I've come up with a lot of very cliched lines, but it is an amazing community. Like I do think that is true. I do, and I've personally had a great experience of that. Like some of my clients I've known 30 years. They're like the first people I met in snowboarding. I still work with my friend Ed. I'm lucky enough to like work with loads of really old friends, and I've always found the community really welcoming. I've always found it. Yeah, I've always found it. I know that like people sometimes feel it can be a bit cliquey and that it can be a bit of a closed shop and all that, but I've never really found that. I mean, it's one reason why I try to be quite inclusive with what I do, to try and pass that on a little bit, pass it back. In terms of like what's bad about it, I think there's a lot of shit work. I think there's a lot of just conventional thinking, and like I do think the action sports industry culturally is about 20 years off the pace of the real world, when it comes to what you might call the pace of the debate around certain conversations around like how the stuff I talked about pay earlier is a really good example of that. Like how is that even a thing? Like how have you even got to have that conversation about paying people fairly? In certain industries, you'd get laughed out of town. Like so that stuff I don't know why that is. So I think there's probably what I would say, but I've been lucky, like it's given me an incredibly interesting career, and still enables me to do like really interesting things. So Yeah, I've had a very, very good experience with the action sports industry.
Is it that somehow the business model is broken?
You know, it's interesting when certain brands come along that sort of do really, really well. Like, and I'm not the world's biggest fan of Liquid Death, but I think they're quite an obvious touch point right now. Like, and all that is really somebody doing things like very differently with a point of view, as we've been saying, and communicating that incredibly ruthlessly. You know, and it does show up a lot of the rest of the stuff that goes on, really. But I think you're completely correct insofar as, it feels like there's a little bit of a reckoning coming, maybe, you know, in terms of like the structures, the timelines, the models, not super fit for purpose, really, are they? You know, we've talked about a few examples of like how media's had to adapt, and we've talked about, you know, the pay thing. We've talked about my experience with my workplace and how I've adapted and all that stuff. But I don't know if you really see that in manufacturing and retail and brands so much, really. It feels like there's a lot of people that are still kind of clinging on to I'd say trade shows as well. I mean, an obvious one, you know, they're kind of trying to adapt, aren't they? Yeah. They're trying to do something a bit different, but, you know, and again, that's one of the most obvious things that you hear a lot in the game these days, isn't it? Like, I think you're onto something. I think it obviously does start there, really, doesn't it? But on the plus side, if you have that point of view, if you have that, you can stand out quite easily, I think. Because I think the word you used, conservative, is a better word, isn't it? You know, a lot of hidebound thinking, you know, that doesn't really pass muster if you give it a proper prod, you know. So if you're prepared to do that in your little field, you can probably do all right, I still think, at this point.
So looking back, what would you say is based on this discussion, this might be quite a difficult question for you to answer, but looking back, what's your biggest learning linked to a mistake that you've made over the last, let's say, 20 years since you founded?
That's actually quite an easy one.
Okay.
Have the difficult conversations as early as possible. I think that's the biggest mistake everyone makes, whether it's in your marriage or that very definitely. You can't learn that often enough, and you quite frequently have to learn it over and over again. I think that's the simplest thing you could do to improve a lot of the relationships in your life. Personally, client agency relationships, very, very obviously, and having the confidence to stand by, perhaps not that, if the outcome of that conversation is unpleasant, i.e. you need to pay my invoice because we've got a contract, you know what I mean? Like, and then you know, the classic thing, isn't it? If you're an agency, is like, well, I can't really say that to them because they're going to walk, you know, like, so you let your boundaries blur, and then you've got a real problem in a year, because if you let the boundaries blur at that point, then they're going to take the piss even more. Same both ways, like, obviously. So if you have that conversation early, and it means you have to make a decision that you don't work with that person, you know, you said if you turn work down, I mean, that's what that is, really, isn't it? You should probably do that. Now, we don't always do it, and we still have situations that come up where, especially as we've got bigger, you know, and we've got more clients, and I perhaps don't have eyes on everything, where you're a bit like, oh, right, that happened. Okay, we're there again, are we? You know, and it comes back to that thing of like empowering people. That is a real thing you've got to learn, right? In this game, you got to, when you're a junior, you are going to avoid those conversations as much as you can, because they're scary. You know, especially if it's with a client, you know, and the client's taking the piss, and you don't want to upset your boss, and you don't want to upset the client, but you're gonna have to do it at some point. So I think, and if I had somebody that worked for me who was 28, who stuck their hand up and said, you know, that'd be the point of view that I'd be looking for, I'd be like, you'll do me. Like, we had someone who works for us the other week, off her own back, like, went to one of the trade shows, booked a load of new business appointments, didn't tell any of us, like, went round, came back, basically on a meeting, said, oh, by the way, you know, I was like, Jesus Christ, that's the most initiative anyone's ever showed here. Do you know what I mean? Like, amazing. Like, that's what you want, isn't it? Yeah. So I think, like, that is quite an easy question, actually. I think, like, have those difficult conversations as early as possible, and be prepared to act upon the outcome, because sometimes it is just going to lead to a shit show, really. And so, but you're better off know early. You know, if the answer to that is, well, these people aren't going to stick to their contracts and they're going to constantly pay you late and you're going to drain admin and energy on them, then you're better off walking at that point. Difficult when you need the money.
Yeah. Wow.
But, you know, if you make those decisions, you'll compound them and you'll end up making more and more of those decisions, won't you? So,
and it'll cost in the end the money, one way or another.
You got to break that cycle at some point.
What 3 pieces of advice would you give to future leaders of the industry?
Have a point of view. Don't be afraid of challenging the conventions are a necessity, I would say, because most of them, you know, language is a real tell, isn't it? You know, like you can see it when people just start using these weird phrases that you've never heard before. You know, like the marketing piece, you know, I'd never heard that till like 3 years ago. And then suddenly every meeting I'm in, everyone's going, should we talk about the at-home piece? I'm like, what does that even mean? You know, like, and obviously people are saying it because they think that that's what you say if you're a successful person in the marketing industry, you know, stuff like that. Like, you know, ask yourself, not like we should do this, like ask yourself, should we do this? It's just all that stuff, isn't it? I think those are the obvious, well, maybe not obvious, but like the things that that will help you have that point of view, let's say, you know. I think they're obvious sometimes, but just not always easy to do, especially like you said, if you're younger. We don't want to get found out. You know, but everyone thinks they're going to get found out. Like, you know, it's the old gag, isn't it? Like in Hollywood, no one knows what they're doing. Like, that's just true for life. No one's got a clue what they're doing. Like, everybody is making up as they go along. Literally everybody. I mean, you've seen Joe Biden this week. Yeah. He's like, I mean, I'm not even joking. Like, that is what's going on there. Like, he's in a situation he does not know how to handle. So he's winging it. Yeah. And he's the president. I mean, Christ. Yeah, and that is literally what's happening before our eyes. Like, so everyone's doing it, and there's no shame in admitting that, and kind of just sort of, ask questions. Admit you don't know what you're talking about. It's so rare when people do that it becomes really impressive. You know, say I don't know. It's very, people are like, oh, check this guy out. Confident enough to not bullshit. You know. Doesn't know, look at him. Well, it's true though, isn't it? Because especially in those situations, people are so, you know, shit, I better use the phrase the marketing piece because otherwise I'm gonna, you know what I mean? Like it's just that stuff, isn't it? You know. Absolutely. I would say. Okay, so let's fast forward 5 years, and today is your last day at ACM. You're handing over the reins. Yeah. What's your message to the team? Probably what are we going to do for the next away day, because that seems to come up quite a lot. No, do you know what? I'm gonna not be able to answer that because I really don't know. I'm not a big. I wouldn't really have some huge motivational speech planned. Really, probably just like communicate in some way that they just trust themselves to get on with it. Like, you know, because like they, if we achieve that, it'll be down to them. You know, it'll be down to their efforts. Like, there's no way that me and Jojo are going to be able to accomplish that on our own. Like, we can kind of have a plan. We can put a plan in place, and we can sort of say, right, here's how we're going to try and do it. But in terms of it actually being accomplished, that'll be down to them. So if we actually get to a point in 5 years where that's happened, everyone will have learned so much, and we'll have had so much confidence from that, and I think I'll just be really proud of them, really, and just kind of say, like, yeah, you know, you kind of did it, so carry on doing it, really. I think it'd have to be something along those lines, really. Thank you very much, Matt, for your time and for being so open. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thanks for your support, and see you soon for the next Sports and Outdoor Mentors episode.